Hello, welcome to the Mind Muse podcast. I'm your host, Christy Turley, and today Johanna Lynn is joining me. Johanna is the founder of the Family Imprint Institute, and she has an international private practice. She is committed to resolving painful patterns from living out in the next generation as if on repeat. And what I love about her is she has this scientific approach to what she does in the healing world. And I can't wait to dive into our conversation. All right. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome, Johanna.
Great to be here. Great to be with you.
Cool. So today we're talking about the three invisible forces affecting your business and relationships. And I love that because I do believe, and we talk about it a lot here on the podcast, the things that are holding us back are the things we can't see. It's that inner game. It's that mindset. Mm-hmm. And so we have some interesting things to talk about today, don't we?
We do. We're going to go far beyond the mindset conversation.
Cool. So tell me a little bit about how you got started, just to give a little bit of background.
Absolutely. So about 20 years ago, I started working with bodies. I was a massage therapist and understanding, that crick in your neck, that sore lower back, that has a lot more to do with the job you want to leave but aren't quite finding the courage to do it, or the marriage you're unhappy with but sort of stick around and try to find the way through. And that kind of led me into mind-body understanding, where I found this body of work all about epigenetics and neuroscience. I know we'll get into that, but it was just sort of this one thing leads to another, and I'm sure many of your listeners can relate. They've probably followed a similar track.
Totally. Yeah, I remember when I first learned about the mind-body connection, and I had gone to massage therapists and naturopaths and things like that, but I never quite got it until I read the book Heal Your Body by Louise Hay and Feelings Buried Alive Never Die.
It's one of my favorites.
Do you remember who wrote that? I can't remember.
Oh gosh, no, I can't recall.
It's like the only book called that, so if someone wants to Google it. But it's hugely important to understand, and also listening to your body for those indicators. Like all of a sudden you get a stiff neck and you're like, what's that about? You look it up and it's like, there's like 7 possibilities that could be mental or emotional.
Yeah.
And it like gives you a huge insight.
Absolutely. It's almost like every time I've looked that up, 1 or 2 of those things are like, oh yes, this is exactly what's going on.
Mm-hmm. And so, let's talk a little bit about epigenetics, because this is not some like fringe like belief system. Like this is rooted in science, they're finding. So tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, absolutely. Epigenetics is a field of study that really understands family experiences, what's unresolved for our parents and our grandparents, even things as significant as trauma has its effects on us, literally changing our DNA. I call it the family imprint. And so much of what's running us has to do with this epigenetic piece.
So what do you mean by what's running us?
So what might be our knee-jerk reaction to, the triggers life throws at us? What we might want to respond to our spouse when we're feeling like, cuts a little too close to the nerve. How we parent, and the decisions we make in our business day in and day out.
It's kind of like that automatic, whatever that automatic voice is in your head that is probably narrating every situation, or like when you just like you said, knee-jerk trigger that you might get when something happens. Cool. So what do we do about this? Like you talk about a lot the epigenetic imprint.
Yeah.
So, and the ancestry and the grandparents, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so when we look at it from a sort of professional perspective, sometimes our relationship with money can come into that, our own confidence, the risks we're willing to take, all of that comes from this blueprint in our family. And so one step is really understanding, building our awareness. So that might look like, oh geez, my mom and dad were super risk adverse, and so does that change the risks I'm willing to take, or do I kind of lose my ground every time I take a big risk? We're just beginning to understand the roots of what informs our decisions, and how that is really kind of guiding all of our thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you have a good example of something that maybe happened with one of your clients that demonstrates exactly how this plays out?
Yeah, absolutely. There was one significant one. It was such an interesting case that it stands right out as you ask that question. This gentleman was 43 years, or is 43 years old, at the time of a real financial crisis in his business. He's a lawyer. He had built a huge practice, but he found, as he looked back, hindsight is always clearer, that last year of business, he'd made a series of sort of bad calls, bad decisions, bad investments. And he was looking, kind of teetering on this decision of, do I claim bankruptcy? And there was so much shame, so much frustration, all kind of wrapped up in what had built up over that year. So he was coming to me to really explore what could he do here, because of course this is affecting his marriage, how he's showing up as a father, kind of all parts of his life were affected. So my work is about uncovering what I call a 2-generation genealogram. So I look at the client, what they're up against, their challenges, and then looking at what went on with mom and dad, and then the 4 sets of grandparents at the top, till we understand the influences. Wouldn't you know it, this gentleman's father, at the same age, 43, he had trouble with gambling and sadly had lost all of the family's money on gambling. And at this time, he had an estrangement from his father. The father was kind of the bad one in the family, pushed out, and he really hadn't spoken to his dad since that time. So when we begin to look at this, you could kind of see the lights going on for him as he was connecting these dots. In our work, we call this an ancestral alarm clock. You would be surprised how many times things happen around the same age. Our parents, they got divorced at 52, and we are in our early 50s and just don't know why we're not connecting with our spouse anymore. We see these things that rise up around the same time. So back to this lawyer, he was able to really understand, wow, I was following something larger than myself. It started off this kind of pitfall, this kind of cascade of bad decisions, so that in an unconscious loyalty, I remained equal to the father that I've always judged and excluded. And so the real work is actually coming to understand what was behind his dad's addiction to gambling, some of those bad financial decisions, and even separating or creating an inner relationship with him and his dad, because they hadn't spoken in so many years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. So, okay, let me just dive into this a little bit. So,
Mm-hmm.
some people listening to this might have a problem with what you just said. Like, what do you mean? Like, I have this imprint and that's like a destiny, and I don't really create my own destiny. Talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that.
Absolutely. So I believe I'm definitely a student of creating our own destiny, and really, I'm responsible for my thoughts, and of course, all the good things that we can do, eating well, exercising, fueling the body, moving towards our goals. And equal to that, there is this blueprint, this imprint that comes from our family of origin. And it seems that we only really uncover it when we've hit a wall, similar to that lawyer story. Typically, we don't go looking back into, our family history unless we're trying to solve something that's really painful, that's really got us on the edge. And so there is certainly, well, science supports we are imprinted with things that happened to our family. So when we look at really intense studies, descendants of the Holocaust, we know that the children of Holocaust survivors have the same stress markers in their body as if they lived through the Holocaust. And so
Whoa.
now we take that into our everyday experience to, did dad succeed and do well in what he wanted to do in his life? Did mom give up the things she really wanted in order to be there for the family? And then what kind of compromises are inside of us when we feel pulled in all the directions we do? So these are the type of ways that it influences and shapes our lives.
So how would one, and maybe we need to talk about this later, feel free to postpone this question till later, but
Sure.
how would one work through this? Like, what did you do with the lawyer? Was it like
Yeah.
as simple as having the awareness that this
Yeah,
was
let's
going
break that
on?
down. So the first step is the awareness. So I'm gathering the facts of the family, which kind of connects those dots for him. But yeah, I wish everybody listening could have been in the room. You should have seen almost the relief kind of wash over his face in this sense of, wow, this wasn't just a mistake that I made. This connects to a larger picture. And he's sort of leaning into me like, really? If we have this internal conversation, I'm guiding him to have an internal conversation with his father. So a lot of this, if anybody has a therapy background, has a little bit of Gestalt influence with it, where I'll have him imagine his dad is sitting with us in the room. Close your eyes. What happens in your body as you feel your dad join us here? Oh, I feel tense. I feel tight. I feel constricted. Perfectly understandable. There's been years since they've had a conversation. And then I'll give him sentences to try on saying to his dad. So a lot of them sounded like, I've been judging you all this time, Dad. And here I am at the same age that you lost all of our money. And I've placed my family in the same situation I felt you placed us in. So there's a humbling that happens right away. There's a greater understanding. There's a softening. Because what we know in this work, it's been around over 50 years, that there's an organization to how the family works. And if we exclude one of the family members, what we judge them for, what gets all tangled up in that, is bound to repeat in the next generation.
Yeah. So cool. Very, very cool. So this was his father, is that correct? The
Yes.
lawyer's father. How
Yeah.
far back do you look when it goes to
Mm.
the generational healing?
I only ever have to look 2 generations back.
Mm.
We get all the information we need there. Now, there's all kinds of, theories that it can go back 7 generations and even further back from there. But I got to tell you, I'm fairly science-based. And when we follow epigenetics, the proof is 2 generations back. So I kind of stay within that range.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how in your work, like just from our previous conversations, you've talked about how the quality of the relationship with the father and the quality of the relationship with the mother impacts things, and the differences between those two relationships. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. It surprises so many people that the quality of our relationship with our parents have so much to do with what we call success in life. And I know that means different things to different people, but I like to think about it if we can imagine almost 2 barn doors, one is dad and one is mom. And if that relationship where we literally got our body, our life from, is closed off, then we kind of thwart our life force. So let's say this lawyer, this door to dad is completely closed. And now he's really only got access to 50% of his life force, of his ability to really achieve success, if his relationship with his mom is completely perfect. And I don't know anybody that's the case. So this whole concept of where we receive our life from generates how things go out there in life for us. Now, if I'm even more concrete, even more specific, when we think about what is everything to a baby, and I know you're a mom too, this whole idea that, loving our children, eye-to-eye connection, rocking them to sleep, all of that attunement and attachment, that really builds the neural pathways of our brain for I belong, I matter, I'm loved. And for many people, things maybe got a little lost in translation from that very beginning. Or it was more logistical than that. Mom had to go right back to work. Mom and dad were running a business and they were super busy. And so even if loving grandparents step in or the world's best nanny, it's still not the roots of what we need from mom and dad. And so that feeling of I didn't get enough of what I needed, that child sort of feeling, lives out in, not enough time, not enough energy, not enough clients, not enough money. And instead of chasing the not enough out there, if we really work at the root cause of it, everything changes within our professional results.
Wow. I don't know who said it, but it might have been Tony Robbins or someone like that. That everyone on planet Earth has one thing in common, and that's this open wound of not being enough.
Right.
And so if your parent like I am listening to this and I'm thinking, oh crap, you do my children or whatever, it's like pretty normal, right?
Of course. I mean, I'm a working mom. I'm about to leave and travel and go teach, and it's this awareness that there will always be separations. We will always need, family helpers to come in and do this whole thing called raising children. What matters most is how we reconnect that attachment. Oh, I missed you so much. I'm so glad to be back with you, and really setting time in our calendar apart for the importance of that connection.
So is this work that we do on ourselves, healing maybe that initial birth, or, the first few years of life, is that like what most people call inner child work? Is that the same thing?
No. So this work, our term for it is break in the bond. And it's probably one of the most overlooked things in all of, when people reach out for support, because it happened before language came online. We can't go to a therapist and say, geez, I spent the first week of my life in an incubator, therefore I don't really trust my husband's love. We don't make those connections. And yet, if we think about that newborn baby, what is everything to that sweet little baby? Connection with mom, breathing in her smell, hearing her voice. And so something as, medically understandable as time in an incubator, maybe we were born premature, or as I say, mom had to go right back to work. It creates a change in how the baby develops. And so a very interesting little clip on YouTube your listeners might want to look up is called the still face experiment. It's one of the most popular experiments ever done, really understanding when mom's face just kind of goes like a blank, what happens to the baby? She's physically there, but emotionally not reachable. And this changes our own inner sense of confidence, our ability to go for certain things when mom is disconnected regularly. And so, yes, this can all be reknit. This is not something that's a life sentence. It's just the awareness to go back and really work with our foundation before we can build that dream.
Great. I will put that link in the show notes. That would be super interesting
It
for
is.
everybody
I
to
think
look
you'll
at.
find it interesting.
So we've talked a lot about the mother. What about the father?
Yeah, so in this work, we say the mother is the one who builds the life, who brings life into being, of course, through birth. And now the father's role is to really bring the child into life. So from dad, we get this concept of direction, like what's the right choice for me? What's the right path? And sometimes that can be through modeling, and sometimes that can be through, whatever I choose, I know my dad's behind me. If the floor were to just fall out of my life, he'd be the one I could call and count on. And then this really supports our direction and confidence to know where we want to head in life.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the father and the mother, how might that play out in adult life? Say you're in your 20s, 30s, or 40s or older.
Yeah.
Like, how does that manifest?
So I think in this work, there's something called the orders of love. And whether we're 4 or 44, the rule still applies that parents give and children receive. And so even if we're, a multi-millionaire, entrepreneur, there might be this feeling of, well, what could they offer me? They're not in my industry. They're not going to have the advice. But it's really our way of approaching them. Our way of, can I show up in this conversation as the daughter? I take off the business hat and I arrive really as the daughter with this open heartedness of what can I receive? And maybe it's a compliment and maybe it's just the connection, over dinner, but really having that way of entering into the relationship, really feeling as though you're the daughter or you're the son.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So, the grandparents, we talked
Yeah.
about 2 generations back. And so far
Mm-hmm.
we've only we've really only talked about the parents, right?
Yeah,
Even with
that's
the
right.
lawyer example. So,
Yeah.
any examples or just thoughts that you want to share on the grandparents?
Absolutely. So the reason grandparents come into every session that I do is because typically we'll have a complaint of either mom or dad. So let's just say dad is super critical or dad's really authoritarian and there hasn't been much room to make your own decisions as a child. And the client feels really stuck, really angry, really closed heart to dad. Now, there's not a lot of movement we can have to improve the person's life if half of that door is just, completely shut. And so we want to get a bigger picture. So, what went on for dad to have him be so critical or so controlling? Oh, wow. We look back, grandpa was super quick to anger. Grandpa lost a sibling, let's say, and was blamed for not watching the sibling while he was playing. Grandpa's the older sibling. And so now he controls to keep everything safe, to keep everything, out of harm's way. And so if we start to look at the why of what's behind certain things we've blamed our parents for, something else can open up outside of that patterned way, outside of maybe that dance that we get stuck in with them, so that we can open up to more of our own life force, more of our own direction and choice. The benefits on the other side of that are just so profound.
Yeah, that's great.
Mhm.
Well, okay. So, when someone comes to see you, or if they're
Mhm.
interested in doing this work, do they really have to have a knowledge of,
Mm.
like, say, a medical history? It's kind of like the emotional trauma history, I guess you would
Right.
say, of their grandparents and their parents.
That is such an important question. Often, people that have been adopted will call me. And this is one of the greatest breaks in the bonds. They, were given away at birth or they spent some time in foster care. And typically, they have a really hard time finding their direction in life, feeling loved and safe in relationship. And of course, they don't have any family history. And so what I'll do there is reverse engineer. So I'll look at what are some of these patterns that just keep happening in any relationship that you're in. What is that common thing that you end up feeling? And then we can work backwards. So even in families that are not adopted, but let's say there's lots of family secrets or there's lots of unknown in the family history, we can still gain results with this approach.
Wow. Okay,
Mhm.
cool.
The reason why I guess I should expand is I use something called the core language approach. And it's incredible what we reveal in how we describe the challenges that we're up against. And typically within about the first 5 to 10 minutes, I'll know exactly what sort of the root stuff in the family is going on based on how you've described what you're up against.
Wow. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, cool. What else should I be asking you? This is so fascinating. I mean, the relationship with the mom, affecting the
Yeah,
relationship with the self and the level of confidence, and the
yeah.
dad affecting direction and what's right and clarity. And,
Mhm.
I guess if you're feeling wishy-washy in life, maybe it's something to look at, right, with the dad,
Yeah,
or maybe the dad's parents even. And
that's
then,
right.
you work internationally, so I mean, it really
Yes.
seems like you're a Nancy Drew of family history. I mean,
Oh, I love
there's a
that.
show about ancestry, right, and genealogy, and they get the celebrities involved and they
Oh,
look to see
yeah.
where they come from, and they go back centuries and find out they're related to famous people or whatever.
It's
But
such a great show.
you're only going 2 generations back,
Yeah.
and you're looking at, like, the challenges or the traumas that these people have gone through. And I imagine that, like you were saying before with the lawyer, I mean, that was such a
Mhm.
great example of, a guy who probably cut out his dad in some ways out of his life, really actually coming to terms and saying, I'm you, you're me, and healing himself and healing that relationship with his father. Like, it sounded like, unfortunately, the father had passed away already, but
Yeah.
it sounds like, you were still able to heal that. And I definitely have the belief that the father knows what went on, with that
Yes.
confession and all that. So that's really cool. So, I mean, tell us a little bit more. I mean, I think
Hmm.
families are so central to
Yes.
society. It's the fundamental unit of society. So if we can heal our families, we can really heal the world and our communities and our counties and our states and our government and the
Oh,
world, right?
I couldn't agree more. And it's so fascinating to see where this body of work is going. So I'm just heading down to California next week to offer a training. And one of my colleagues is joining. She's a trauma-informed lawyer. So really bringing this work into law around being conscientious around when someone has experienced a trauma, how do we ask these types of questions based on all of this intergenerational element to bring in the full picture. Another person that I've heard of was actually a judge in Brazil. And I didn't know this, but there was a 2 to 3 year wait list for people who would like to get divorced. And so this judge had just taken this training on his own interest, but thought, geez, there's such a waiting list. Why don't I try out what I've been learning? And so when he would have both couples that wanted to divorce come into his office, would apply this with this approach, there was 100% resolution. There
Whoa.
wasn't the fight over who gets what and the custody. It was just understood, and they came to a resolution. And now we all know couples where there's only going to be one side that comes in. There's no way they're going to work together. And so he tested that. He just worked with, half of the couple, and they got to 91%
Whoa.
resolution. So there's something about bringing in the full story, really understanding what's at play,
Mhm.
because I got to tell you, systems marry systems. And what goes on in any marriage, 90% of it has to do with each other's family of origin. And so I was just so thrilled to hear this being applied, in law. We're seeing it come through in education formats. It's catching on, and it's just taking a little bit of its time.
That is huge. I mean, when you consider
Mhm.
the divorce rates,
Yeah,
and last I heard it was like 50% or something,
that's
but I bet
it.
you it's even more now.
Yeah.
And probably in fewer years. I don't know what it was like within X number of years. It's probably fewer years now. I remember when a neighbor came up to me and said, "Oh, you're celebrating 10 years." Yeah, I don't have a lot of friends that have made it past 5. And now we're at
Wow.
17, but
Wow.
like, it's amazing.
It is. It
This really
is.
has a lot of power to it. So, I want to go back to the adoption. This kind of is
Mhm.
curious to me. So, if someone doesn't have parents or grandparents that they can go ask,
Mhm.
hey, did you have something happen to you when you're X or something in this topic, or maybe you're not even having people ask those questions, but how how would someone who's adopted who has no idea where they came from
Mhm.
because the family didn't take good records or whatever, or maybe their parents are gone.
Yeah.
How would you dive into this?
So, what I'm asking about then, instead of gathering the 2 generation genealogram, are the patterns they keep falling into, whether that be thought patterns, whether it be relationship patterns, whether it might be business failures or, a confidence crisis, and then beginning to work with that. So, we're dealing more from the repetitive pattern place, trusting that that's got its roots in the family of origin. What I found in my adoption cases, I don't know how to explain this, but the biological family can often mirror the adoptive family. So we might hear through records, yeah, your mother struggled with a drug addiction, your father had alcoholism. We'll see something like that play out in the adoptive family.
That's strange.
It's very, very interesting. And so we're following this piece of, well, first of all, when I work with adoptive clients, we work with that break in the bond piece. So that's very much body centered. What I love about this approach is it brings the body along. This is not just about a new cognitive understanding, we've got to bring the body along with us. Because if that sort of bracing against you're going to leave me, or I don't matter, all of those sort of breaking the bond messages, we can't really get much further with the understanding that we're going to have for what we'll work on deeper into the sessions. That's kind of square one.
Mm, okay. That's very, very cool. So,
Mm-hmm.
if someone wanted to learn more about this, and maybe they're not quite ready to hire you yet. I mean, you can give your website out. That's fine, and we'll put that in the show notes. But like,
For sure.
how would someone learn more about epigenetics? Like, are there books out
Mm-hmm.
there, or
Oh,
is there
yeah.
another YouTube video? Like, what other resources can you give people? I'm sure the best clients for you are the ones that are the most knowledgeable, or they've done their homework and they kind of know
Oh,
what
not
they're. Yeah,
necessarily. Just open-minded people.
yeah,
And then the questions that I ask are very direct, very family fact orientated. We
yeah.
don't go into the story of it, and we can get tons done.
Cool.
Yeah. So a book I would recommend was written by my most influential teacher. His name is Mark Willen, and it's called It Didn't Start With You. And what I love about it is it gets into all the cool epigenetics and the studies, but he also gives lots of case studies, client stories of how it's applied, and that's just so fascinating to me, along with a whole bunch of exercises you can do for yourself at home to really kind of dig into this for your own knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And so I'm just trying to think, like, someone listening to this, like, they're like, oh, this is interesting. I never heard of epigenetics before. Maybe they have, but are there certain like symptoms that
Mm.
someone will see manifesting in their life where or some questions that they can ask themselves to say, is there something like that, like a sign,
Yeah, there are
Yeah.
many.
Mhm.
So I just had this lovely client come in yesterday, and there's all this really upsetting behavior from his 5-year-old son. And, what should we do? And what kind of discipline should we give? And, all these kind of questions. And really, I said to him, what is unresolved in us, mom and dad, is expressed by the children. So really, we've got to take the child's behavior as
Wow.
clues to understand what's unresolved, either for mom or for dad, or in between the marriage. And so we look at them as like a guidepost to understand what's really going on. Another clue might be, geez, I'm in my third or fourth relationship, but I still end up feeling the same. It's still unsatisfying, or there's still these triggers that just feel all too familiar. Maybe we reach a certain ceiling in our own performance or our own earning capacity, but we can't seem to get above that. That edge, riding that edge, can be something that is part of that ancestral alarm clock, or an unconscious loyalty that lives in the family. Anytime there's patterns that we just can't seem to get ourselves out of, usually the roots of that live in our family system.
Wow. That's
Mhm.
incredible. And what you said about
Mhm.
children, it's like, that makes you think twice about disciplining your children in some ways. Cause it's like, on one hand, it's
Absolutely.
like, yeah, go to timeout or whatever your chosen method is. But like, on the other hand, it's like, what's unresolved in me
Yeah,
or my husband, in my case?
totally. The
Yeah.
wisest move is to take that misbehavior as information and to begin to really get an understanding. I always said to think of, my son and the challenges that any child is up against, to how do I best support him? And how did I feel at his age? And what went on for his dad at this age? And it's always just this wealth of information that is never down the road of discipline.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Gosh, that seems like a good daily practice to go through the day
Yeah.
and like really
Yeah.
reflect, like who was I triggered by? Or,
That's it.
where am I at in general in life? Or yeah, what was it about the children's misbehaviors today? That's
That's it. Well, and even as you say that, I think of a client who was so overwhelmed by what she called my super needy daughter. It's like I can give and give and give to her, and there's just more needs. And she would think, gosh, she can't ever sleep on her own, and she calls me into her room. And then it occurred to her, wow, my daughter is asking for, expressing out what I never got. and it's still like a, an open wound here,
Mhm.
that her mom was very non-affectionate, very non-emotional, and now she's got this, needy little girl, and no wonder it feels like nails on the chalkboard, because it's calling out to her what had never really been resolved. And so sometimes we can reparent ourselves in the patience and the compassion that we can give to our own kiddos when their stuff comes up, because when we follow epigenetics, it's actually our stuff, or our spouses.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So talk to me about spouses for a little bit. I
Mhm.
mean, we've talked about kids, we've talked about
Yeah.
parents and grandparents. Talk to me about spouses.
Well, here's something that may shock your listeners. It certainly was a big one for me to hear and apply in my own life. Our partners show up exactly as we need them to show us what's still a live wire in our body. So, if you've got a common complaint that my husband's always traveling, his work comes first, or I'm not important, or he doesn't set time aside for connection, often we look back and we've got a dad who was a workaholic, or a mom who had to juggle two jobs because she was a single mom. So the things that we felt we didn't get enough of as a child can be projected into our marriage. And so a lot of the times it's actually not a relationship issue. It's going back to the origin from where it all started and finding resolution there. It's just getting played out again inside our marriages.
Wow. We really are the
Mhm.
stars of our own movie.
Yes, we are. Yes.
Yeah. A lot of information to take in, right? About
Yeah.
what's manifesting in our outer world is really about
Mhm.
healing our inner world, right?
That's it. I really believe that's such a good way to say that what's happening out here is a direct reflection to sort of that inner harmony. And is it harmonious, or is it a little bit more chaotic than we'd like it to be? And therefore it gets reflected out in our world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So cool. Well, good.
Mhm.
Well, how can people get more information about what it is that you do?
Yeah, well, I created a gift for your listeners because I imagine they're all super busy women like you and I are.
Men
It's
too.
and men too, yes. I'm sure they would like the audio too. It's called Be Good to Yourself. And it's just quick, it's maybe 15 minutes, really guidance to go inward and explore some of the emotions that want to rise up. But in the busyness of our everyday lives, sometimes we can't give it the attention that it needs. And so, they can certainly listen to that audio, get a sense of that. And to learn more about this work and the different options, you can visit my website at www.johannalynn.ca.
Great. And I'll put those links as well as the link to the gift in the show notes so people
Great.
can check that out. That's great. So let's leave everybody with a final thought. What inspiration can you leave with us today? Either a story or a quote or
Let's think. What's a good inspiration? Well, I think all of these pieces, all of the parts of our lives will continue on generation after generation until somebody says, you know what? This stops with me. And so, my invitation to your listeners would be to look at what patterns do you want to be free of? Maybe what hurts would you want to even safeguard your kids from? And to begin to look at how that kind of lives and rests in your body.
so good. Thank you so
Hmm.
much, Joanna, for being with us today.
Oh, it was such a pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
Yes.